In this module, we'll talk about multifactorial disorders. Let me mention some of the features of multifactorial disorders. A multifactorial trait is governed by the additive effect of two or more genes, but more importantly, these genes have a smaller contribution, but the contribution for environmental and non-genetic influences is the most important in the multifactorial disorders. Many physiological characters in humans are governed by multifactorial pattern of inheritance. For example, diabetes, height, weight, blood pressure, hair color, gout, etc. You may have noticed that even monozygous twins, meaning identical twins, some of you may have monozygous twins or identical twins in your families. Even if they are reared separately, if they are raised separately or they have different eating habits, they may achieve different heights and different weights because of nutrition and other environmental factors. The multifactorial disorders, these are governed by a Gaussian distribution. Let me explain to you what that is. Here on the screen you can see a group of people arranged in a specific way. They are arranged according to their height. If you collect, say, 1,000 people at random, very few, and you categorize them, you make them stand in lines according to their height, you will see that very few people will be, say, for example, 4 feet or from 4 feet to 4.1 feet. From 4 feet to 4.1 feet to 4.2 feet, you have the next group, so on and so forth. The majority of the people will fall in the category which is the average of the population. As you go to both the extremes, very short height or very tall height, the number of people will be fewer. So this gives rise to a bell-shaped curve. Here you can see on the screen, this is Gaussian distribution. We can apply this to our scenario. We are talking about multifactorial disorders. So if we have, say, 4 or 5 genes which contribute to a particular feature, skin color, for example, or height or weight that we have talked about. So these genes plus the environmental factors, they will contribute, they have an additive effect till that additive effect crosses an arbitrary threshold. The arbitrary threshold is pointed out in this slide. If we are talking about a multifactorial disorder, for example, diabetes or blood pressure, if a person unfortunately inherits bad copies of genes, several of them are bad, plus the dietary style or the lifestyle of that individual also is not very healthy, that person will cross the arbitrary threshold and will display that disease. The disease will manifest itself. So this is basically Gaussian distribution, and this is how the multifactorial disorders manifest themselves. Recurrence rate for first degree relatives, I'll explain what first degree relatives are in the next slide, but let me tell you, first degree relatives are, I will mention that first degree relatives are basically who have 50% of our genes in common, like parents, siblings, or children. So the recurrence rate is 2% to 7%. If we are talking about Mendelian genetics, we have said that in Mendelian genetics, even the recessive disorders, the siblings have a 25% recurrence chance. But in multifactorial, it is 2 to 7% because genetics is playing a smaller role as compared to the environmental factors. The probability recurrence rate for identical twins is 20 to 40%. Identical twins basically means they have exactly the same genes in both individuals have same genes, they're identical genetically. Even in them, the recurrence rate is not 100%, it's not 50%, it is 20 to 40%. So this figure shows basically how important the environmental factors are as compared to the genetic factors. Here on the screen you can see a graph, a pedigree, and which tells us the degree of relationship. The first degree relatives are the ones we share our gene, 50% of our genes with. For example, our parents, our brothers and sisters, our children. These are the people we have these people are our first degree relatives. The second degree relatives, of course, are the ones with whom we share 25% of our genes. That category would include our grandparents, our aunts and uncles, our blood aunt and uncle. So not an aunt or uncle by virtue of marriage, but an aunt and uncle by virtue of blood relationship. So third degree relatives are the ones which will have 12.5% genes in common with us, so on and so forth. So next we will look at the cytogenetic disorders in the next module.